Check 1, 2. Yeah, it's working.
Yeah. Cool.
Hey, Ron, can you grab my phone?
Hi, just checking to see if anyone can hear me.
Hi, Dean, you can hear me loud and clear.
Great. All right. Thank you.
Absolutely. I'm gonna introduce you in 1 minute. Are you ready to present? Let me turn your video on as well. Let me give you permission to do that. Good morning. Are you, you got the, okay, awesome. Yeah, we can get started.
One, there we go. Let's find the right spot. Hi, everybody. Here we are. Next day. Happy Saturday. Let's go ahead and get started. Quick introduction. Dean Ching is a senior advisor to the China program at the U.S. Institute of Peace. Previously with the Heritage Foundation, he spent over a decade as a senior research fellow on Chinese political and security affairs. He has written extensively on China's military doctrine, the technological implications of its space program, and dual use issues associated with China's industrial and scientific infrastructure. He's the author of Cyber Dragon, an examination of Chinese information and cyber activities. All right, here we go.
Good morning. At least remotely. It's a bit of a rainy day out here in Washington, D.C. So one of the interesting things this morning is finding out that Arizona doesn't actually follow the rules of time zones. But I'm here today to talk about China and its deep space challenge to the United States and where its space program is going. Let's begin with some context. It's important to recognize that in terms of space, China is neither the United States nor Russia nor the Soviet Union. The Chinese space program does not parallel the American or Russian space programs. It has had very different motivations. Interestingly, it was heavily driven by economics and technology as opposed to military concerns until the late 1990s and early 2000s, at which point and one of the reasons we can say this is because when we look at the American and Soviet space programs, one of the earliest focus was missile early warning, to be able to see missiles coming over the pole towards our respective homelands. And even now, in 2023, China, despite having developed a wide array of satellites, does not appear yet to have fielded missile early warning capabilities in space. Another thing to keep in mind is that, of course, we and the Soviets were engaged in a space race. China is not in a space race. It is not trying to beat the United States to the moon. They acknowledge we went to the moon, in 1969 and have been back several times with people, and that whatever China does, it won't be along that timeline. What it does appear to be racing, arguably, against other Asian nations to be the dominant Asian space power. And it does seem to be engaging in a certain amount of racing behavior when it comes to deep space beyond the cislunar range, in terms of building out a exploration capacity for Mars and beyond. China's space program, because, as I said, was not driven by racing instincts, but has been driven by internal considerations. Above all, the benefits that space capabilities would give to the Chinese economy in the 1990s and early 2000s, the technological developments that accompany space capabilities. The Chinese love to say that space is very dense in advanced technologies, computing, advanced materials, power generation, energy storage, obviously telecommunications, advanced manufacturing, systems engineering, systems integration. And more recently, say within the last 10 years or so, much more now driven by military considerations. Another thing to keep in mind is that China views space holistically. When China talks about space and space dominance, for example, it is not only talk about satellites, it's also talk about ground stations and the data links that tie all of these elements together. Space is seen as contributing to every aspect of Chinese power. Military capability, obviously, economic capacity, science and technology, political unity. They use space to draw together the wide disparate parts of a continent-sized country. They use it to try and influence Taiwan, gain some diplomatic respect, even cultural security. When we think about the major space movies of the last 2 decades, Gravity, I'm not saying it's a good movie, just saying that it is a space-related movie. The Martian, Independence Day 2, definitely not a good movie. We see that the Chinese play a role in whether it's Sandra Bullock coming back to Earth or Matt Damon being able to do his Iron Man routine and get back to his ship, which only can come back to Mars orbit without going back to Earth, thanks to CNSA, the China National Space Administration. The commander of Moonbase in Independence Day 2 is a Chinese officer, et cetera, et cetera. Because China is a major source of funding for movies, because the market is enormous in terms of audience share, China has been able to ensure that it is seen as playing a role in space. So that's a cultural security aspect. China has talked about the Space Silk Road. So with the Belt and Road Initiative, previously known as the One Belt, One Road Initiative, China has been building out space infrastructure in terms of everything from satellite ground stations to the use of Beidou, the Chinese position, navigation, timing constellation, not simply for surveying and mapping where China is going to build its developments, but also in terms of the timing signal used for everything from pipelines to cell phone networks. China has also been using space and its position in space to try and push new industrial standards to make sure that Chinese equipment, Chinese space systems are part and parcel of global standard setting. So with that in mind, where is China going? The good news here is that the Chinese tell us. They produce a space white paper roughly every 5 years, tied to their 5-year plan, which is a key part of their economic development effort. And so the most recent space white paper, which came out in 2022 and was supposed to come out in 2021, but bureaucracies everywhere are sometimes not very good about keeping up with scheduling, lists a variety of objectives, particularly when it comes to not just development of new satellites, which they wanted to do, but in particular missions and tasks in the cislunar and beyond. So in the space white paper, they talked about an asteroid sample retrieval mission, lunar missions, including sample retrieval from the polar regions, surveys for future lunar bases, possible robotic base, a Mars sample retrieval mission, missions to the Jovian moons, as well as new launch vehicles, and a new space traffic management system that would cover all of cislunar space. Since then, the Chinese have come out and said that they now want to send a crewed mission to the moon by 2030. And what's striking about that is that that was not in the space white paper. Now, the space white paper would only cover out to 2025, but we're intrigued by this decision to announce a space, a lunar human mission, because 2030 is the next 5-year plan. And you would think that they would have had more prerequisites being fulfilled in this 5-year plan and announced as such. So it's an interesting question why they seem to have suddenly decided that they are going to go to the moon with people by 2030. How does China view the moon and cislunar space? They increasingly talk about this as a strategic arena supporting terrestrial, political, economic, and military objectives. In this regard, in particular, is the use of what they term application satellites, which is differentiating them from scientific and research satellites. The idea is to put satellites that have practical use, immediate applications rather than scientific missions into cislunar space. And what we have seen, for example, with the deployment of satellites to L2 is that these are communications and data relay satellites, not, for example, astronomical observation systems, such as James Webb Space Telescope. And I think that this is important because what this says is that the Chinese are interested in developing this region, not simply for space exploration, not simply for scientific purposes, but for practical economic reasons, not least of which goes back to that space traffic management aspect. In support of these various missions, the Chinese have been pursuing a very consistent program known as the Zhenghe program. So in 2007, we had the Zhenghe 1 orbiter. In 2013, we had the Zhenghe 1 lander. In 2019, we had the Zhenghe 4 far-side landing. And in 2020, the Zhenghe 5 sample retrieval mission. Now we see for Zhenghe 6, we're probably going to have another landing on the far side of the moon, not towards the poles. Zhenghe 7, I believe, is supposed to be another sample retrieval mission that maybe have been flipped. But all of this is part of an effort to really understand the overall lunar environment, both near side, far side, and at the poles. And especially if they are going to do a human spaceflight mission soon. The Tianwen Mars program, what is striking about Tianwen which landed on Mars in 2021 and deployed a rover. This was, first off, the entire mission was successful in the first try. That's stunning. A lot of other countries have tried to land on Mars. Many of them have failed. I'm not sure anyone succeeded on their first try. But more importantly here is that the Chinese have now put a mark out there. Up until Tianwen landed, every image from Mars has been American. It has been from an American system, lander, etc. That's a political statement from the Chinese view that the deeper elements of the solar system have been dominated by the United States in terms of exploration. And China, on its first try, beamed back many pictures from Mars. And that is basically saying, all right, you're first, we admit that, but we're number two. And to borrow a line from the old Avis commercial, we try harder. So that is a very important message. And it's no accident that the Chinese have also been rather crowing about the failure of the Indian lunar lander, which is to say, yeah, you got to the moon, but our lunar landers have worked and sent back data for a significant amount of time and eventually even brought back samples. Where are you on this? Where are the Chinese likely to go with regards to Mars? And how have they looked at Mars? They have looked at Mars, much as other countries have, as being a very significant interplanetary expedition, as opposed to simply going to the moon. One of the very first interplanetary missions the Chinese had planned was the 2011 Yinghua 1. That was part of the Phobos Grunt mission. It was going to go up on a Russian rocket along with a Russian mission to Mars. The Russian rocket had a launch failure and wound up in a basically never left Earth orbit. It was in a bad orbit and eventually deorbited into the Earth. And in my opinion, I think that sent a significant message throughout the Chinese scientific and engineering community. Depending on other people is not a great idea. And you often hear about the importance of space cooperation. Why don't we and the Chinese cooperate with each other? A lot of times, especially American analysts will blame us, and we can talk about that during Q&A. But it's important to consider whether or not the Chinese necessarily want to cooperate with other people. Their track record on space cooperation is very limited. And as I said, their cooperation with the Russians in particular has arguably left something of a bad taste in their mouth. So the Tianwen program, which was in 2021, began, as far as we can tell, in 2016. And so was the product of roughly a 5-year R&D process. So what is striking there is that we don't have much insight into China's space budgeting process, but what we do seem to know is that they have programmatic stability. So rather than going back and forth over funding, which of course affects the design of the mission and what you can put onto the spacecraft and redesigning, and which adds to expense, they said, all right, we're going to go to Mars. This is what we're going to do. Here it is. Tianwen 1 included a number of instruments. The Tianwen lander itself had a magnetometer, a mineralogical spectrometer. The Zhurong rover included a penetrating radar, as well as its own magnetometer. Interestingly, they did work a little bit with foreigners in terms of developing some of the instrument packages, but in terms of funding and the main effort, it was Chinese. This has other implications when it comes to things like commercial space. With the Chinese, it's important to recognize here that they are pushing development of a commercial space sector. Now, China itself, not being a market economy, has a lot of state-owned enterprises. And that is the dominant element of the Chinese space industrial complex. But in addition, they also have decided to allow the creation of actual commercial companies that will survive based upon profit and loss. This comes down from a 2014 guiding opinion of the State Council. where they basically concluded that private capital would be allowed. Up until 2014, it was not even allowed to, but would now be allowed to develop, launch, and operate commercial remote sensing satellites, would be able to provide market-oriented and professional services, so space services, everything from navigation, timing, to imagery, to potentially communications services, etc., and can construct satellite ground stations and ground applications. As a result, we have seen the Chinese push the development of a variety of companies, and these range from space launch to small sats, they are pushing now hard to try and develop their own space-based internet as a challenge to Starlink. So we're seeing a variety of capabilities evolve in the Chinese commercial space sector. This is an enormous set of developments, and it presages a significant challenge to the United States, not only in terms of traditional space capabilities, military, strategic sensing, et cetera, but even in the commercial space arena, because why did the Chinese decide to allow commercial space development? Because they did recognize that state-owned enterprises, such as the ones that dominate China's space industrial infrastructure, are not going to be innovative. They are not going to be very cost-effective, and that Starlink and SpaceX are creating conditions for genuine technological development and cost savings that are going to have enormous benefits and consequences. The technological innovation that they cannot afford to fall behind on. And so what we have seen here is this range of capacities developing in launch services, satellite sales, remote sensing, satellite internet, rocket production, satellite production. All of these are seeing significant advances and developments in this regard. At this point, I want to stop here for two reasons. One, I do want to open up to questions and answers, but second of all, I do apologize. I have a domestic situation that has developed that I need to take a 1 minute break from. I do apologize for that, if you don't mind. I do apologize for that. Let me open up to questions.
Yeah, we can take a couple questions here. Go ahead, Jan.
Hello, thank you for the talk. I would like to ask, can you clarify what's the commercial reason for having a communication satellite at L2 point? It's about 4 seconds light year. I mean, it's the communication distance is about 10 seconds there and back.
Yeah.
So I cannot imagine that being feasible.
So what I would say is that the Chinese are interested in applications which isn't necessarily making money. So commercial satellites and data relay satellites out at L2 do a couple of things. One, the reason they deployed a relay satellite in the first place at L2 was so that they could communicate with the far side of the moon. And from what we can tell about Chinese reporting is that they are interested in developing a range of satellites to deploy to L2 that will do additional data relay, which does suggest that they are going to put additional things out at the far side. So that's not scientific research, that's data relay. Second of all is that if, as we think is likely, the Chinese are going to try and deploy a lunar PNT network, and this goes to the idea that the Chinese are interested in setting standards, then, and who is going to who is going to determine the timing signal that is used for the moon? Or to put it differently, what will be the language of space traffic management? Will it be English or will it be Chinese? And when we look at air traffic management on Earth, it's in English. All international air traffic is in English. And that's an enormous psychological advantage, political advantage. So from the PRC's perspective, as we move out into cislunar space, they would like that to be with Chinese industrial standards and the Chinese language. So it's not that communication satellites per se are going to be deployed at L2 and somehow be competitive with geosynchronous satellites for supporting terrestrial comms. I'm not saying that at all. What I am saying is that the Chinese are going to be deploying a variety of application satellites, whether it is data relay satellites, whether it is communications and other packages to the L2, and other Lagrange points, in order to support cislunar operations, in order to support lunar operations. There is an interesting strategic consideration here, which is if you think in time of conflict, Earth-centered satellites, meaning satellites out to geosynchronous, are likely to be targeted. And whether it's with kinetic kill systems or whether it is with jamming, cyber, etc. Satellites out at the Lagrange points may well serve as something of a strategic reserve. Yes, obviously, they're going to be a bigger time gap than those from geo and below, but they're also much farther out there, arguably harder to target. So you may have some, at least residual capability if you have data relay and other satellites out there once people start targeting the terrestrial systems. Let me add here, one of the things to keep in mind is that China's development of space capabilities across the gamut is not necessarily focused on being financially remunerative. This is above all true for the state-owned enterprises. Commercial sector, as I said, is interested in making money. But the state-owned enterprises are, at the end of the day, supported by the state budget. And what that means is that they can afford to build systems that, one, they can afford, in some cases, build excessive numbers of systems. One of the reasons the Chinese have been able to go to the moon very rapidly with follow-on satellites is because they often build 2 of each. If the first one fails, and so far they have tended not to fail, they have a backup ready to go in very short order. If the first one works, then they just fire off the second one as an additional research package. And that also has implications for the operation of constellations. A constellation may not appear to make money because it doesn't make money. But that's okay, because from the operational perspective, from the political perspective, it serves other purposes. So a slower communication satellite network that is more survivable may well be something that, from the Chinese perspective, is a reasonable trade-off.
Have the Chinese shown much interest, in your opinion, in looking for life or traces of past life in space?
We haven't seen them do much in the way of SETI or things like that, which doesn't mean that they're not. One of the challenges here is simply keeping track of the various Chinese space developments and what gets reported in their own press reporting. And then there's a huge gap between what their own press reports on and what we see. And this has only gotten worse over the last, let's say, 5 to 10 years. Some of you may be familiar with CNKI, the China National Knowledge Infrastructure. It is a massive electronic database of all of China's, well, almost all, of China's journals, journal articles, etc. Up until about 10 years ago, certainly most university libraries, the Library of Congress, others could access CNKI, usually at a fairly high price, but then LexisNexis isn't cheap either. beginning about 10 years ago, what we started seeing was that the Chinese were censoring the results. That what it used to be that you could pull up most articles that you found. Now it was you can get an abstract, but you couldn't pull up the PDF. Then it became that entire search results were being censored. Now, according to quote unquote Chinese law, for fear of exporting national sensitive information, CNKI is as much a gap as it is a filler. That you're simply getting entire topics that are coming back, the equivalent of 40404, error 404 or 403. This is a huge problem, whether it has to do with Chinese space research, whether it has to do with Chinese search for extraterrestrial life, research into core samples. We really are getting less and less information out of China. Finally, the last piece of this, and we saw this unfortunately with the Zhenghe probes, is that the Chinese aren't very good at sharing information. That, for example, with the lunar sample retrievals, they basically held all of that data close hold because they felt that Chinese scientists should get first dibs. And so it was over a year before they released any of that data, and much less have made it available to others to start doing research on. So this is a huge challenge, is simply trying to figure out what China is doing, what China knows, and what China is trying to learn about.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Dean. I think we have time for one last question.
Do you think the Chinese will try to land a taikonaut on Mars in the first half of the next decade? And if so, do you think they would be making an announcement like with the moon landing, or would they not do that to avoid the embarrassment of being seen of losing a race if, for example, SpaceX should get there first?
Well, I think that's an excellent question. That's a hugely complicated question. So first off, do we think that they're going to try and put a human on Mars in the first half of the next decade? I actually would have said up until about a year ago that absolutely not. The Chinese are going to be spending their time trying to put a person on the moon in the first half of the next decade. Because given their own announcements, given the development pattern of both the Zhenghe lunar exploration program and the Shenzhou human spaceflight program and the Tiangong space station, that what you were probably going to see was a merger of those two at the apex sometime in the 5-year plan, 16th 5-year plan, which would be 2031 to 2035. The fact that they are now trying to put a person on the moon by 2030, I'll be honest with you. There are two possible ways of thinking about this. One is that there are problems in other space efforts, the Chinese space efforts. The Long March 5 rocket has been a mixed success. The Long March 9 has been canceled, supposedly in favor of a reusable rocket. You need something like the Long March 9 to go to Mars. So it's possible that they're going to do the human crew to the moon while they're trying to figure out how to get any major payloads to Mars. The alternative is that there has been a decision made that they are going to go to Mars sooner rather than later, in which case the human trip to the moon is a necessary proof of concept, test of production capacity, all of those sorts of things. If the Chinese are going to decide to go to the moon, I would have said, up until about a year ago, that there is a huge range of things that they would have to do in advance that they may or may not announce, but which we would see. It would be to send robotic missions to Mars that would approximate the weight, sample retrievals that they know that they can get something off the Martian surface back here, that they can maintain TT&C the entire way, back and forth. These are all things that they haven't really done with the exception of Tianwen-1. And any kind of loss of life would be huge, whether it's to the moon or to Mars. The Chinese have been very fortunate, and I, for one, am very glad about this. They have not lost any astronauts up through this phase of their space development capacity. If they were to try to go to Mars in the 16th five-year plan, and I keep bringing up five-year plans because that's how the Chinese think, financially, budgetarily, programmatically, in terms of five-year plans, that would be a rush. And that means potential cut corners. That means it means a significant increase in risk. Are they willing to take that risk? That ultimately falls on Xi Jinping. Evidence so far is he's not a big risk taker, not for something like this, not which would have significant international impact across multiple frameworks.
Thank you so much, Dean.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'm not quite sure how much time we had, so if my time's run out, I certainly don't want to hog the stage.
No, yeah, we're going to leave it there. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Have a great day.
You too.
All set.
There we go. What a great presentation by Dean Cheng. Next up, we have Dr. William Clancy. Dr. William Clancy is a cognitive scientist specializing in the nature and applications of artificial intelligence. His work combines theory and methods from computer science, philosophy, psychology, and anthropology. He worked at NASA from 1998 until 2013, primarily at Ames Research Center, where he was chief scientist for human-centered computing. Dr. Clancy was part of the first cruise, Flashline Mars Arctic Research Station, and has been a longtime volunteer of the University Rover Challenge. Let's give it up for Dr. William Clancy.
All right. Well, thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to be presenting this morning, and it is quite an exciting opportunity that I had. In 2017, I observed the operations on board the Okeanos Explorer, which is a NOAA ship that uses a remotely operated vehicle to explore new regions of the ocean. Now, NOAA, as you probably know, is the United States National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, and it's part of the Department of Commerce. So in this talk, I'm going to provide an overview of the Okeanos exploration system, and I'm going to compare it to using robotic systems to explore Mars. So I want to use this as a way of making clear what do we mean by robotically mediated, and what are the opportunities and the challenges of designing an exploration system for planetary science. So my study of the Okeanos Explorer was a continuation of the work that I did at NASA studying the nature of exploration. I participated on 17 field expeditions, and that included as well as observing missions directly, the Phoenix mission, which was in Tucson in 2008. You see Carol Stoker here, and you probably can't read it, but they were wearing signs proposing let's sample the white stuff now. And I also had the chance to be inside the science operations at JPL. So as a cognitive scientist, my interest was studying the nature of scientific inquiry. And this is something that had only been looked at in terms of manipulating data to form equations. Nobody had really gone out into the field in cognitive science studying how does exploration naturally occur. And what we come to understand is to view it as a form of active learning. And this is really important when we're developing new technology and mission concepts. So I became involved with the Okeanos Explorer through Shirley Pomponi, who was a leading oceanographer in Florida's Harbor Branch Oceanographic Institute, HBOI, located in Fort Pierce, Florida. Now, Shirley was becoming concerned that NOAA was shifting the research funding from Harbor Branch's submersibles and ships to shared robotic systems that were going to transmit the video back to the scientists at home. NOAA's view was that this would be more productive and cost effective, and more people could be involved if they used what they called telepresence. And Shirley learned about my studies of the Mars scientists using the Mars Exploration Rover. And she realized there might be a parallel. As I explained in my book, Working on Mars, we're able to do field science on Mars without being there. She was worried, well, how can we get oceanographers to explore without going to see directly in person? And I pointed out to her that also it didn't seem, the fact that we couldn't go into space didn't seem to be discouraging students from becoming planetary scientists. And so Shirley provided funding to me to do ethnographic studies of this new work practice. And what we wanted to know was, what are the advantages and the disadvantages of using this, what they call the Okeanos Exploration System, compared to not being, to being on a ship or being undersea as what they had been able to do before. So this is a graphic produced by NOAA and the Exploration Research Group. And it's an overview of the entire system. And it's an excellent example of what I referred to yesterday as comprehensive design, because it brings together people, technology, and the environment into one coherent operations center system that has one purpose, which is to do scientific exploration. And what is novel about this design is there's only two scientists on board the Okeanos Explorer, a biologist and a geologist. Everyone else, the other scientists who are part of the team in real time, the public and students located in different universities, are in what NOAA set up as exploration command centers. And they also could be at home watching this in high definition video. And there are 7 of these outposts that were set up. There's a number of engineers on board the ship, and they're operating 2 robotic systems. One is Serios, called the sled, which is essentially hanging from a steel cable on it can be up to 6 kilometers long. And the other is suspended from Serios on a flexible tether, what they call Deep Discoverer, or D2, or very simply the ROV, the remotely operated vehicle. And it can be up to 30 meters away from Serios. And the scientists are interacting on board with the remote science team using a telecon, which is a live open network on a telephone, and they're also very actively using a chat room. Everyone gets to see the high definition video that's coming from D2's cameras, and the public website also offers the same video, but on a 30-second delay at a lower resolution. The results of this, what NOAA intended and they accomplished, is that the scientists, the engineers, and the public are all virtually present on the seafloor at the same time, and they're also virtually present to each other. Now, D2, the ROV, it's a second generation system, and it's based on Robert Ballard's design. And he, of course, was the one who worked with James Cameron in rediscovering the Titanic. The zoom lens, which you see on the lower left, it provides almost microscopic imagery. And this is usually the most exciting part of the dive. And here we see a comb jelly that's being closely viewed. Now, what they use Serios as a kind of context and for safety, and also for the team to see where the ROV is located in the broader space. And we're using this whole system to carry out one dive per day. And it's deployed on roughly a 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. schedule, and that's based on the union contractors who are on board, who are assisting NOAA with the ship. The dives are going to traverse a distance of hundreds of meters, and they'll go down to the lowest point, and they'll go up from there. The path of the ship from one dive ship to another, site to another, it's planned weeks in advance, and it's done with the remote scientists using some maps that might have been available in advance. However, usually every night, the ship will move over the new site and produce new bathymetric maps, which are basically topographic maps. And those are used to fine tune and lay out the traverse path in the morning with the remote scientists. So as part of my study, I was invited to work for several weeks with Chris Kelly at the University of Hawaii's Exploration Command Center. Chris was then the science lead for a 3-year NOAA investigation of the US Marine Protected Areas in the Pacific. We sat here, usually alone, in the ECC, watching the video on this high definition wall display that you saw. But we were always communicating with a group of scientists internationally, as well as with the onboard scientists. And we made use of the chat room and the teleconference room, the phone line. We had a number of other displays available to us. We could see the two scientists on board. We had a view of the traverse plan and where we were located on that plan in that traverse at any particular moment. And the scientists were also, besides informally talking to each other in the chat room and over the phone, they were logging the descriptions of everything they were seeing, which was being keyed to the video and the photographs that were being taken as they proceeded along. What I found is that the scientists got to know each other, and maybe some of them had met, but they really were working together through this chat room. And here you see the geologist on board was asking a question about biology, whether the Nautilus is a cephalopod. And 3 other people became involved, one prompting another one to confirm and provide more information. And so the scientists on board are monitoring this chat room, and they very often would ask one of the scientists who were remote to get on the phone line and speak to the public to convey that information of what they had just discussed. And so really what's of interest that's dramatically different, and of course, real time makes a big difference, very different from NASA, is that the orientation of this whole system is towards the students, the public, and the remote scientists who are observing. At every moment, that narration is in with that orientation. So here's some more examples of what we could see. And you can see this, you can sign up yourself and receive the links that will show you this, as we just finished a mission off of Alaska in July, as these are continuing. I was very impressed by the geology, how varied it was. It was a little bit like learning to scuba dive, where you think you're hanging out in the middle of the ocean. Well, you're doing a surface EVA on the seafloor. And so you're seeing what's the ground, the surface below. And also, it was a big surprise to me to learn that everything we were seeing was an animal. And it's one of those things that you go through the whole school system, you get a PhD, and you're like, how did I not know that you needed, that all plants were photosynthetic, that it wasn't just part of, that you couldn't have plant life below about 400 feet, I believe it is. Anyway, it's always exciting to be observing this stuff. They have use of a robotic arm, and here you see a vacuum tube that was added after I was on board. They very often would grip a rock. They try to get a sponge, perhaps. I didn't know a sponge was an animal either, but there you go. And so I was always telling them, you got to tell the public these things. People don't know these things. And they could also deploy a temperature probe as they go into the hydrothermal vents. And that was also important. But in the upper right-hand corner, you could periodically, they showed this other camera view, and I could see 3 engineers in front who were controlling the rover, and the 2 scientists behind. Here you see actually Shirley Pomponi, the biologist on the left. And I was very intrigued about, well, what's going on here between and behind the scenes? Because I couldn't hear much communication between the scientists and the engineers. And how did they prepare? How did they work together? How did the engineers actually deploy these systems there every single day? What kind of maintenance were they doing, and so on? And the only way to get answers to those questions, of course, was to get on board. So in 2016, I had the opportunity to visit NOAA's Washington, D.C. Headquarters, and I presented my proposal to do an ethnographic study on board. And it's formulated around the questions here, which are very much the same questions converted over, the questions that I asked for the Mars exploration rovers. What accounts for the quality of the scientific work, considering the system and all of its parts, the people, the roles, the different computer systems, the programs that are used for planning and visualization and so on. How do we understand how the quality of the work emerges from that? What are the actual work practices within the ECCs and on board the OCs, the Okeanos Explorer? And of course, here was the fundamental question: how does the exploration system affect the remote scientists' participation and their collaboration, both positively and negatively, in doing the scientific work? Now, what actually came out of this, to give you a punchline, is that it turned out to be a huge success, the NOAA system, and it's been continuing now for, I think of maybe 10 years. So new collaborations are formed internationally. And what you have is the high definition cinematography. You're able to go far below where the submersibles were able to go. And so the regions of the seafloor that can be explored, bringing to bear international expertise, is just completely new. Now, it would be fun, and I could give a whole hour talk about what it was like to be on board a ship. I had never even been on a cruise before, maybe a ferry boat out of Staten Island. But the life on board was really something, and I got to spend 3 weeks doing that. Probably the most important thing to know, and this pertains to our Mars work as well, is that there are 46 people on board, and we're basically could think of as a village to ourselves. And we managed all the operations, and we even changed our destinations without consulting with Washington. And that was a big shock to me, because at NASA, there's no way the scientists could change their plans without going all the way up the hierarchy. And of course, this reflects the history of the Navy and the inability to make those kind of communications back in the past, but it persists today. So there's 24 people on board who are operating the ship, about half, and that includes 8 NOAA Corps, the commissioned officers, members of service members who wear uniforms, and 16 wage mariners. They belong to a union. You have the engineers, the technicians, and the stewards who operate the ship. There are 22 people called augmentators that included the NOAA coordinator, who managed this entire expedition. So she was actually on board with us in this time. 2 science leads that I've mentioned, 2 mapping leads, and a science data manager. The augmentators group also included 9 ROV engineers and 6 video experts who in real time were managing this video and sending back clips and change different resolutions, posting it online. And they belong to the Global Foundation for Ocean Exploration. There was one more augmentator, and he was designated as the VIP in big letters next to his picture, and that was me. And I explained to everybody that they gave me that title to make me feel better because I was the only one on board who wasn't being paid for being there. Truth be told, I probably would have paid if they asked. So the ship, we had really difficult kind of expedition, you know, and some people leave out of Greenwich, Connecticut or wherever. I got to leave out of American Samoa, and we were at sea for 2 weeks and went to 13 different seamounts. That was also of interest. We weren't just dropping in the middle of the ocean. These were areas where there might have been some, say, volcanic system going on in the past. Now, there was an unexpected tropical cyclone that came up on day 4, and that required actually at sea with high waves, retrieving Sirius and D2 and hightailing it to the north. That was, of course, another big moment for me. How could no one not know that there was a tropical cyclone forming on that day right next to us? But I had something else to learn about the weather system, and that's a separate talk. I didn't understand how we actually do what we do. We did return on day 11 back to the south. We picked up the lost site, and we completed the expedition at the port of Apia in Samoa. Now, this is an overlay. It shows how the scientists were actually viewing this area. And it shows, for example, and I won't have time to go through details, but the Rose Atoll, a very famous marine national monument. We went to that spot. It was quite exciting. And there's a large marine sanctuary associated with American Samoa. So I want to talk now about the operations on board. And the important point is that the crew, these people who are working for NOAA, and the ROV engineers who represent that global foundation group are really working together as one team during operations. You wouldn't be able to tell looking at them who belongs to a union, who's a NOAA civil servant, and who is an employee of this foundation. And so they're performing all the operations just like we have at JPL in some extent, guided by the interests of the scientists. And so you see on the far left, we have an engineer who's knotting D2's umbilical to a rope that's going to be used in retrieving it from on the surface at the end of the dive. We see the biologist who's on board in the center. He's from Colombia, and he's retrieving a coral from the sample box that had been part of that day's dive. And on the right side, on the far right, is the commanding officer. He's reviewing a weather chart with the junior officer, the mapping lead, and the expedition coordinator during a 9 a.m. briefing. And this is, again, for me, a marvelous experience. This 10-minute meeting where everybody was standing except for the commanding officer. Very, very efficient work. In the bottom photo, you see a secondary bridge, which is above the fantail, and it's used for the deployment and retrieval of Sirius in the ROV. So I want to get to a little bit more now the theory of how I view this and how we view the operations. So when I'm studying operations, I try to analyze, to visualize the system of what makes this work possible. And everyone's familiar with a hierarchy as an organization hierarchy, which shows the management and the control, the authority of an organization with employees and groups and so on. This is very different, and it's really showing the what we call the work system, how the operations are occurring. And what's true about what's the nature of a dependent hierarchy is that each of these subsystems, so you have the ship operations, the operations of the expedition on board, the engineering with the ROV especially, and the science work that's occurring. Each of these has its own integrity. They have different practices. They come from different institutions. They have their own roles, activities, technologies, their own procedures. They go through their own training. They have different funding. They're on different career paths. But they're working together as one system, one team during a dive. And the nature of a dependent hierarchy is that each of the higher levels is providing an environment that makes the survival and the existence and the quality of the levels below possible. So if you were to extinguish, say, the engineering level, the science work could not occur at all. Or if the ship weren't there, none of these other activities would be possible. So a ship is really a perfect site for an ethnographic study. Everything is very well defined. And I spent most of my time in the control room with the two scientists in the back. Here you see there's operations occurring on the video at the start of the day. We're getting ready to deploy Serios off the stern and D2 on port side using a different crane. So the engineers, I'm going to show you a video in a moment, so it's actually relevant to try to remember these roles. On the far left, you have the navigation, ROV nav. In the center, you have the pilot, and I'm being told I need to move along a little more fast. Okay, and the co-pilot on the right. What you can't see is the cinematographer on the side. And then off, of course, on the bridge is the commanding officer, the operations officer, and he has a whole different world that he's working in. He has to deal with the weather, the sea conditions. He's running the ship using a Microsoft program. It's a robotic ship, and so on. So I'm going to show the video now, and you're going to hear, this is a video that I took while I was inside the control room, and the audio comes from the public feed. You're going to hear on the left channel the scientists, and on the right channel the engineers. And I want you to pay attention to, especially at one point where the pilot, who's very much in control of operations, will make a remark to the ROV nav, who has to make a calculation about how much time do they have where they are before the ship and Serios are going to need to catch up with them. And they're going to need to move as a unit and not just hang there in space.
We're gonna lose that stop set, which is actually, that's not what they finalize. But we can, yeah, that's now probably also to be covered use the so it's one like with that move on now of those each one of those sample ones, the sort of thing on this. Organic material and it's not invested for makes down to one of that microscopic as well as other particles.
So you hear there how Santiago is narrating for the public while all of this is occurring. I'm going to have to move quickly. There's a lot of things to convey. This is another way in which I represent the operations, how it's occurring. You're thinking about different activities, different concerns. You have the science work, the cinematography, you have operating the ship. The data is being interpreted mostly in the chat room and over the phone. And then you're gathering data, of course, as you move along, and you're operating the ROV. One of the things that this points out is the difference between cooperating between different systems, say between science and engineering, and then the collaborations that occur within those systems. It's one of the most important things of understanding that difference between collaboration and cooperation. The robotic mediation is distributed through this whole system. It's not just the scientist in front of an interface controlling a robot, but all of the work is possible because of the functional composition of these different activities. All right, I'm going to zip along on now, getting to a conclusion. Next 3 slides on what do we learn from all this. The first thing is we come to, and again, I'm looking at what, and Noah likes to refer to what they do as exploring inner space in relation to outer space. The first thing is that what these systems are doing is enhancing cross-disciplinary collaboration. They are collaboration tools. They're not robotic explorers. They are tools for collaboration among scientists. And they're doing this by having shared a video that or photographs that are available that promote conversation, and conversation promotes learning. The social media is enhancing the public awareness and their interests. And what NOAA has done especially well is using these different forms of media, video calls, chat rooms, to enable participation with different levels of interaction and authority. So to get back to the original question that Shirley asked, what does all this add up to? Is it the advantages, disadvantages? Those are some of the advantages. Here are the problems. As I see it, all of our exploration has been highly constrained by having just a few robotic laboratories. In terms of not being there, the views are quite limited. The mobility of the different scientists, we know from Mars, one of Jim Rice on Spirit, Mars exploration rover, wanted to run up to the Columbia Hills and see what was on the other side, but we spent like 80 days crossing because the soils and minerals people wanted to keep doing a nice cross-sectional sampling of Gusev crater. So they have different instruments, different interests as they apply these different instruments, and that's very often forgotten, that the scientists all don't have the same interest in what's happening. Now, in terms of doing scientific exploration, it's very often not realized that most of our time is not moving. The ROV is not, the rovers are not just moving all the time. We're spending most of our time applying instruments, and we have to look at the results in order to decide what to do the next day. We have to always proceed in a slow way. Okay, I'm told 1 minute. Bottom line, I see, and I think we can all see for Mars, it's going to be a huge mix. We're going to have many different systems, types of robotic systems. We have diverse environments, but we're going to have people on Mars and on Earth that are involved in controlling these systems. We're going to have remote and in-person operations on Mars. It's going to be very, very different than we have now. And the bottom line as well, now my final slide, how do we design these hybrid systems as collaboration tools? And we're going to have AI programs that are doing more and more. They're going to help select sites. They're going to be doing more and more of the programmed operations. They're going to be, of course, performing some of these in an unsupervised way over certain periods of time, and so on. But we have to always remember, this is always for the sake, it's conducted by and for people. There's a tendency to view AI and robotics as if suddenly the human race is gone and they're doing all this work by themselves. But people are always going to be involved. The work will always be improvised, and it's going to take time to move through the surface. Just look at how close some of those dots are for Perseverance on these maps. So for more information, you can go to my website and NOAA's site. I have a talk online that I gave with Shirley, and I'd like to thank her again. You have a picture where we brought together these two different perspectives. And also on my website, you'll see various papers that I've written, reference to John Arnold I mentioned yesterday, creative engineering, designing agents for people, a Kindle book I've written, and finally, when computers tell people what to do, all about the TCAS failure in the Uberlingen collision. So those are all available as Kindle books at a very low price. So thank you for your attention. Thank you. I don't know, I probably used all my time there.
Sorry. Surprise. Sneak peek. Next up, we have Tiffany Morgan. Tiffany Morgan is the Deputy Director of NASA's Mars Exploration Program. In this role, Morgan provides program leadership in exploring and characterizing characterizing Mars to understand its current environment, its climate, geological history, biological potential, and to prepare for human exploration. Before NASA headquarters as the deputy director, Morgan was project manager for the Solar Electric Propulsion Project at NASA's Glenn Research Center in Cleveland. She spent over a decade working for Air Force Space Command, now Space Force, with a focus on rapid space acquisitions, including spacecraft missions, satellite command and control systems, and Department of Defense payloads. Welcome, Tiffany Morgan. Where I put this.
Thank you so much. All right, testing. Can you hear me? I can hear me. Yes. Good morning, Mars Society. I am Tiffany Morgan. As I was introduced, Deputy Director for the Mars Exploration Program, and I am very excited to be here today to tell you all about Exploring Mars Together, which is a draft strategic future plan for the Mars Exploration Program at NASA. This is a plan that's been in the making for a couple of years, and we've been collecting inputs from the community probably as far back as 5 years. And it was developed by a joint team of headquarters folks, which is where I'm from, and then with some JPL from our Mars program office. Do I need to stay here? Sorry. Okay, sorry, I'll stand right here. So a little bit before I dive into this Mars Exploration Program fleet chart, I want to tell you a little bit about NASA and how we're organized. NASA funding is organized into, I think, 5 mission directorates now. We have science, which is where the Mars Exploration Program lives. We have current space operations, such as communications and International Space Station. We have future human programs, which would be Artemis, Moon to Mars program. We also have space technology development, and then we have aerospace development. So all this is really to explain that where we live for Mars Exploration Program is in the Science Mission Directorate. And we're the folks that have been going to Mars for, since as Mars Exploration Program in its current instantiation for over 20 years now. And so what you see here on the fleet chart is really not just the NASA program, but Mars as a whole. And it goes back to about 2001 with Mars Odyssey. And Mars Odyssey is still orbiting Mars today, as well as the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter and MAVEN. And that was the last orbiter that NASA sent to Mars back in 2013, about 10 years ago. On the surface today, we have Perseverance, we have Curiosity, and then not shown here is Ingenuity. We need to make that change. But those are the current surface assets. And they can communicate directly, but primarily through the Mars Relay Network, which goes through those orbiters. If you look to the right of the chart, you'll see components of the Mars Sample Return Campaign. So you've got the Earth Return Orbiter, which is a contribution from ESA. And then you've got the Sample Retrieval Lander, which is a contribution from NASA. And then Perseverance is obviously the first element of the Mars Sample Return, and you'll see a lot more about that in a few minutes. Over the last 20 years or so, we've had a series of themes for the Mars Exploration Program, starting with Follow the Water, and Spirit and Opportunity and Mars Odyssey helped us discover that, yes, we have had water on Mars, so let's move on to habitability. And Curiosity helped us prove that Mars indeed was inhabitable. And now we're really looking for signs of life. So Perseverance rover is exploring Jezero crater to sample, bring back rock samples that hopefully have ancient signs of life in them. And then all along that time scale, we're preparing for for future human explorers. So that's just a little bit of background now to introduce the plan, and with one disclaimer up front, this is a draft plan. We're seeking feedback from the community, and I'll share a link at the end of the presentation. We do not have this built into the Mars Exploration Program budget today. However, this plan lays the foundation for advocating for funding. And there are many things that we can do within this plan that utilizes today's current resources. So the plan, as I mentioned before, 2 decades of successful missions to Mars to understand search for life, water, habitability. I also mentioned that the MAVEN orbiter was the last orbiter that we sent in 2013. All of our orbiters are relay network. So it's been 10 years since we've sent a relay, since we've sent an asset that can provide relay services. They're all in extended mission life, which is wonderful because we get so much return on investment out of these assets, but they also cost money to maintain. And we do need that relay network for any surface assets, including any future human missions. So we need to address the aging and critical infrastructure at Mars. We're also preparing for a human presence at Mars now more than ever with Moon to Mars. We need to understand what the samples can teach us about health and about systems that humans will utilize. But what's really great about today is that the landscape and the environment that we're in within the US and within just Earth in general is we've got more ability and more opportunity to partner than ever before. Within the International Mars Exploration Working Group, we now have more than 25 international agency members represented. And then if you look at, I mean, I don't need to tell this audience, but SpaceX, Blue Origin, we've got so many people that are interested in going to Mars. And so we really need to partner and take advantage of those opportunities to increase our return on investment. At the same time, we're doing Mars sample return. And this is critical to science for Mars. If you're not familiar with national academies, they provide our decadal science goals, our objectives every 10 years. They do it for different areas within the Science Mission Directorate, and within the planetary decadal, they've called out the Mars sample return the last 3 decadals, and it's been the #1 priority for planetary science the last 2 decades. In addition to that, they want us to maintain a balanced science portfolio, but #1 science goal is to bring back those samples from Mars. So what we're trying to do with this future plan is to create a sustainable, low-cost program that can kind of go in parallel with Mars sample return and then enable us to be able to take advantage of every launch opportunity moving forward. And then I think I've already mentioned the plan incorporates several inputs from many people across the community. We have the decadal. We have also the Mars Exploration Program Analysis Group, which is a public group for the science community and others. Anybody can register for that and attend those meetings. We have a meeting about once a quarter or so. They set up scientific advisory groups for us. We've had the Keck Institute do KISS workshops. We've worked with industry because a big part of the plan is invigorating industry, not just focusing on science. We've done many industry visits, and then there's obviously the Moon to Mars initiative or strategy that, and their objectives and their tenets have also fed this plan. So we have 3 co-equal science themes, and this is just for the next 2 decades or so. MEPAG, the Mars Exploration Program Analysis Group, maintains our scientific goals for all of MEP. And again, that's a community group that's maintaining our overarching goals. But for the next 2 decades, there's 3 specific areas that we want to focus on. One is Discover Dynamic Mars, and this is really temporal and spatial understanding of Mars as a system. So what's happening with climatology, what's happening with geology, everything around the planet versus, kind of being our focused areas. Then we have the explore the potential for Martian life. These are the main themes that really guide us. Do we have it now? Have we had it in the past? And then support human exploration of Mars. What can humans do for us from a science perspective? And then what do we need to learn before we send humans? And just a little bit more on those themes. So explore the potential for for Martian life, searching for biosignatures, past and present, understand temporal and geographic patterns of habitability, examine and return Mars samples to understand Martian and geological, biological processes, support human exploration of Mars, define priority human-led science at Mars, characterize potential ice-rich sites for human exploration. So if you've heard of the International Mars Ice Mapper mission, that's one that really focuses on this objective. Study atmospheric science and weather for human needs. And then I've decided to add 2 more objectives that are kind of supporting characters to the support for human exploration of Mars. One is understanding potential health and safety hazards for humans. I mentioned that we have a mission directorate that really with Artemis and Moon to Mars that focuses on humans in space. So this is an objective where we support them. And then another one we have is construct analog missions to prepare for expeditions to Mars. And that's one where we really work jointly with them. And then not lastly is discover dynamic Mars, investigate ancient and modern drivers of change on an active planet, understand Mars as a system, and study the unique available geological conditions on Mars to conduct comparative planetology. No plate tectonics on Mars. And so we have a record there. It is our time capsule. It can tell us everything, not everything. It can tell us a lot about what we don't know about its past. So we have 5 primary initiatives to implement this plan. The first is the Mars Sample Return Initiative, and then we've got 4 program initiatives. I'm going to just kind of go into the next few charts because I think you'll hear all about these points here. So I think you saw a chart earlier today about where Perseverance has been. This is where Perseverance was on September 27th. I put the charts together right before a potential shutdown, hoping that we would not have one. And so here I am today, but Perseverance has moved just a little bit from where you see here in the upper left-hand corner. You've got Ingenuity, and then just kind of like right below it is where Perseverance is. The little red targets are where we have taken rock cores. And in that picture on the left, you see Percy, and that is with, I believe, I can't remember that. This is Rochette. This was the first rock that we successfully took rock cores out of, and that's his selfie. And then over there with Ingenuity, again, this was as of September 27th. As of today, Ingenuity has now completed 61 flights, and it went higher and I think faster than it's ever gone before on this last flight. So the reason that we're exploring Jezero Crater, and this was there was a large community process in determining where Perseverance would go, is this is a river delta that goes into a crater. And so we have representative samples from maybe multiple places. And then you've got the rim of the crater as well. So we get these samples and we think that we will have a great diversity to look at from across Mars from just being in this one location. So we've already put down a contingency cache at 3 Forks, and that's right there in the middle of the chart. I think we've got 7 rock cores, a regolith sample, and an atmospheric sample, and maybe a witness tube or so that are in that cache. And Perseverance on board has 12 or so, I think, rock cores and a couple witness tubes and another regolith sample right now, but continues to collect samples. So what I'm going to show you next is the video, or a simulation of the current architecture for Mars Sample Return as it is known today. So you'll see Perseverance collecting some samples, and then you'll see the Mars or the sample retriever lander come down, and you'll see the samples get fed into this the sample retrieval lander. And then you'll see the MAV, or the Mars Ascent Vehicle, get thrown out of the SRL and then launch off into space. And that's all I'm going to tell you. You'll see what's next. Never gets old. Isn't that awesome? So that'll be the first launch off of another planet ever. So it is no small feat. It is quite complicated, but those samples, I'll tell you a little bit more about the samples. Okay, so the Earth entry system, you can see a sample of it here, will land in the Utah Test and Training Range. This was from a helicopter drop test. And then we will transport it to the sample receiving facility for containment and curation. One thing I did not mention before with the OS, which is the football sized orbiting sample container that you saw, it will be in orbit for about 4 weeks by itself, just this little football thing. And the reason for that is it needs radiation to kill anything that might be on the outside, any dust, any regolith that might be on the outside of that OS. We take planetary protection at NASA very, very seriously. And COSPAR, the Committee for Space Research, has established planetary protection guidelines. And Mars is classified as Cat 5 Earth Return Restricted. You may have recently heard about OSIRIS-REx samples that just landed in the Utah Test and Training Range back on September 24th, and there will be a sample reveal on October 11th. Following day is supposed to be Psyche launch, so exciting times. But OSIRIS-REx, as came from the Bennu asteroid, is, well, it's category 5, it is Earth return unrestricted. So it has been much easier for us to bring back those OREX samples than it will be to bring back the Mars samples. However, there's quite a few lessons learned that we are learning from OREX. So once that OS is in orbit, it'll also go into this capture, containment, and retrieval system, which will do additional mitigation for any dust that might be on the outside of the OS. And it will land in the desert. We will put the OS and the entire Earth entry system into a bag. Then it'll go into a case. Then it'll get transported to a vault. This is all within the Utah Test and Training Range. And then it will be transported to a sample receiving facility, which will not only be like a biosafety level type lab that is high containment, but it also has to be very clean. It has to, we have to make sure that we don't discover ourselves in these samples. So we need a very clean, contained facility. And the value of these samples, a lot of people say, you know, why are we bringing these back to Earth? With Perseverance on Mars, there are instruments on board. Curiosity has a really extensive set of analysis samples on board to look at the samples it's collecting. So, but Perseverance is collecting just phenomenal samples from all over. But once we bring it back here, we'll have small amounts, but we'll be able to use really, really high precision, very sensitive instruments to look at those samples from around the world. And we'll be able to take slices and really curate those samples. And then we will also save some percentage of the sample for future years to come, just like we did with the Apollo samples, so that technology can evolve and then we can continue to look at these samples. So the samples will be of value for decades, and it will really revolutionize the way we look at the solar system. Number one priority for the decadal for the last 2 years, and it also will help us understand a lot about sending humans to Mars. What will the regolith do to human spacesuits? What will it do to our breathing systems? Do we know that it's safe for humans to come back from Mars? Do we know it's safe for them to go there? So program initiatives, in addition to the Mars sample return, we've got 4 program initiatives. One on infrastructure, one on technology. I did that backwards. One on science or exploration. So these are new missions to conduct science. Then we have infrastructure to support those missions, technology required for both infrastructure and science. And then we have our Together mission, our Together initiative, exploring Mars together. I really like the Mars for All theme. I think there's very synergistic with the plan we have. And so to quickly tell you about these 4 initiatives, the program initiatives, we've got the exploration initiative, which is really 3 different approaches to how we conduct science missions. The low cost missions, which would be competed 100 million to 300 million dollar missions or so. This does not include launch. Then we have our medium class missions, which would be up to about $1 billion. This would be a search for life type mission, which was also recently called out in the decadal, known as Emily, Mars Life Explorer. And then we have competed payloads that would enable us to take advantage of international launches, other missions of opportunity. So this would create us a sustainable set of missions that could be leveraged at different opportunities, depending on funding constraints. Initiative 2, I've already mentioned the Mars Telecom Network and how that's aging, but another important one is high resolution imaging. Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter has our HiRISE payload on board. If anybody's heard of Mars of Art, or recently there's the bear picture that, anyway, there's all kinds of great pictures of Mars, and HiRISE is responsible for the Mars as Art type pictures. Sample handling and receiving, I mentioned how we're going to curate those samples so that we make the most of the samples that we bring back. The ground receiving networks, which are already highly taxed, data infrastructure, visualization and analysis, and then of course, access to Mars. Spacecraft delivery, payload hosting opportunities. If we can enable this infrastructure and put this in place, it really reduces the burden on all of the other missions, science missions, human missions, to go to Mars, because we have an infrastructure in place. In terms of technology, this is one area we really feel like we need to beef up on the Mars exploration program. EDL, if we have affordable EDL costs, that will also enable lower cost missions. Aerial mobility, in-situ surface mobility, and autonomy. We've been conducting a lot of robotic site visits to look at what our terrestrial capabilities are in robotics and find out how we can evolve those for space. I went and I've looked at Boston Dynamics and the little dog and biped type robotics. There's really a lot there that could be leveraged and that we would be able to invigorate US industry. Also accessing subsurface, in situ remote sensing, and search for evidence of life measurements and telecom. And then the Together initiative. We have 6 different objectives here, but specifically for the Mars exploration program, we would like to enable and create a diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility program within the Mars exploration program that would have an accountable lead. We would have metrics. We would have outreach opportunities. And it would be something that we would do as part of MEP. A handful of things that we already do with MEP is participate in dual anonymous peer review for our research and analysis programs. We participate in the FINEST program, as well as Here to Observe, or H2O. We do a lot of outreach with underserved communities. JPL also has the minority internship program. So inclusion and making sure that we get folks involved from a young age is very, very important to our future in Mars. All right, second and last disclaimer of this talk is this is an aspirational timeline and an aspirational budget. What you'll see here on the top of the chart are our initiatives. So we've got the science missions with the diverse portfolio, infrastructure, technology, and international opportunities, which we will maintain and watch so that we make sure that we can take advantage of those future launch opportunities. And then what you have on the bottom is a sand chart of past and future budget aspirations. You can see the peaks and valleys of the past. That dotted line through the middle indicates today, with Mars sample return kind of being a really big peak. And then you can see off into the future on the right that it's a pretty stable budget. And this is really the low cost sustainable budget where it'll enable us to plan and strategize those future launches. So what we're doing right now to get ready for this and just to maintain our current assets is we are, maintaining our program of record that maintains all of the operational assets we have today. We're preparing for the Mars samples with the sample receiving project. We are also working with ESA on their Rosalind Franklin mission rover, which is also a search for life effort. We are seeking low-cost opportunities to address critical infrastructure needs. So that's through commercial services, through international partnerships. We are continuing to invest in mission-enabling technologies, especially search for life, subsurface access, also novel surface access with robotics. We're looking to develop public-private partnerships and reinforce our international partnerships. And then we've also commissioned within NASA, within the Science Mission Directorate, we've commissioned a study with the national academies to identify science objectives for human campaigns to Mars. So the goal of the vision is really to implement a sustainable portfolio, low-cost competed missions, medium-class missions, infrastructure technology, and missions of opportunity. And all this needs to be synergistic with humans at Mars. So if you'd like a little bit more information at mars.nasa.gov, you can learn about our current missions and some of the things that we're doing in the future. The entire briefing for this draft plan can be found there at that second link. And then if you'd like more information about Perseverance, Ingenuity, and the Mars sample return, you can find information at that last link. And then just one more chart. This is Pine Stand. I think that's how you say the name of this mountain on Mars. This was taken with Mastcam Z with the PI here at Arizona State University, Jim Bell. And I am a hiker. I would love to go to Mars and hike someday, as long as we do it responsibly with the right planetary protection principles in place. And the sooner we get those samples back from Mars sample return, the sooner we'll be ready to do this. Thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate the opportunity. Are we taking, do we have time for questions? Okay.
I got a question right here. Hi, thanks, Tiffany, for that briefing. In 1993, the Mars Observer, the first probe to Mars in almost 2 decades after Viking, failed. And Dan Golden, the new NASA administrator, said, this is crazy doing one Mars mission every 2 decades. We got to take a different approach. I want to have 2 medium missions to Mars every 2 years, a rover or an orbiter, this, that. And they went with that program, although it was modified a bit over time. But nevertheless, in the time since then, we have flown 13 missions to Mars, of which 11 succeeded, 2 failed. The fact that 2 failed, we didn't miss a beat. We pushed right through that. We could have lost 2 more, and the program still would have been batting well over 500. Okay, we did great. Now we're proposing a program where for the next decade and a half, we have 1 Mars lander, okay, which will also carry an ascent vehicle, okay, that has to rendezvous with a European orbiter, which could be failed programmatically if any one of 20 countries should pull out of the mission, okay, or fail technically, okay? So you've got enormous risk, okay, to do this 1 mission, okay? And with like MLE not even proposed till 2039, which is like the future, okay? I mean, I think you need to do the following exercise. You need to say, okay, here's the current program, Mars sample return, it will do this, it will cost this, and it has this much risk. Okay, and then here's the other program that we could do if we launch 2 missions to Mars every 2 years, okay, with rovers and now helicopters, okay, that could fly all over the place. And we can have this instrument and that instrument and the 3 different life detection experiments that different people are proposing. We could fly them all, and the drilling experiment and new orbiters with ground penetrating radar to look for the caverns, and every damn thing that the science community could propose, you could do. Okay, you take those 2 programs, okay, and the risk associated with that second program, which is very low because you would have, you know, about 20 missions to Mars instead of 1. And if you lose 2 or 3, fine. Okay, just put those 2 programs side by side and take a vote. Okay, rather than taking an orthodoxy, which is sample return must be done, and anything else can only happen if somehow it can happen. And our future vision is that we'll have something to do besides sample return. I mean, to literally just put those two alternatives side by side in block, because I have to tell you that every Mars scientist that I have spoken to, while they may be publicly unwilling to criticize sample return because it's not allowed, you put those two side by side, and there's no question as to which they would choose.
Thank you for that. I definitely recognize the challenge, and let's see, I don't even know where to start. I would say many of the science community members have been vocal, so I have heard. The team, NASA has heard them. Mars sample return, the engineering program is actually separate from Mars exploration program. Mars exploration program has the bookends on Mars sample return. So we are responsible for perseverance and the science happening there, as well as the science that will happen within the facility when it comes back. And the intent of this plan is to be able to continue to do science and other things while Mars sample return occurs in parallel. The decadal is a very prestigious organization and product that comes from our science community, and they work on it for a very long time, and they are the ones that have told us this is the #1 priority. This will revolutionize what we've done. This is as important as the James Webb Space Telescope.
Well, how about putting two decadal plans side by side? Okay, a complete decadal plan without sample return, but with the same funds, and the decadal plan with sample return, and just look at those two pictures taken as a whole.
Understood. And I think there are a lot of people, a lot of scientists that would completely agree with you. And I hope that we really can achieve both, because I do think bringing those samples back will do a lot for the future, but I would like to have more missions going more often to Mars as soon as possible. Okay.
I'd like to build upon what Bob just said. So I've been around long enough. I was on console at Apollo 11 to watch
Awesome.
these programs, to watch NASA overpromise, underdeliver, and end up paying gigantic amount of money and being way behind schedule. So I would suggest, in the world that we live in, first of all, that you can use AI to look back on all the past programs that have been done and come up with a scheme that actually doesn't overpromise, that actually takes a look at the history. If you don't pay attention to it, you're doomed to repeating it. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, you repeatedly mentioned how all these samples are going to be analyzed once they return and distributed all over the world, and all these wonderful things by all this high-tech equipment that we're going to have. And yet you've presented a video of how these samples are going to be returned that is so overwhelming and overpromising in what it's going to deliver that it makes more sense in the time frame that you're talking about to miniaturize all of the equipment. And we're promising fantastic robotics. In the next 5 to 10 years, you could probably get everything that you plan to do on Earth and send it to Mars to analyze these samples, so you don't have to do that in the first place. Just seems to me, why wouldn't you do that? Why wouldn't you take that into account as a parallel branch?
So I guess a couple things. First of all, one question I haven't heard, and I'm sure a handful of you know, there was recently an independent review board for Mars sample return. That report came out a few weeks ago, 2 weeks ago. NASA is preparing their response to that independent review board. And that was the second independent review board that we've had for Mars sample return, because we do recognize the challenges that everybody has noted here today. So we take it very seriously. Number two, let's see, miniaturization. If Starship is ready and can go to Mars, the cheapest things we can do are maybe not miniaturization. So that's just something out there that we're thinking about, is really what is low cost. If miniaturization is low cost, great. If it's not, and Starship's going, there's other things that we can do versus spending that time on that. There was one more thing I wanted to say, but I forgot. I'm sorry. I'll Oh, yeah. No, the using AI is a great idea. Depending on what you mean exactly by AI, there's different policies that we have around that. But I do think Mars sample return has tried to take a more objective approach based on prior IRB feedback. So
I'll have yes, no question. Is human presence on Mars contingent on success of the sample return mission?
it is not, and actually, thank you for reminding me that the planetary protection, it is not. However, COSPAR has planetary protection guidelines and they've established knowledge gaps. And the Mars sample return mission really fills a lot of those gaps. So we need to protect Mars and we need to protect Earth. Talk to the biology invasive biologists and the chances and the things that have happened here on Earth. We don't want to do that to Mars and we don't want the Mars to do that to us. And it's really important for us to understand the science of those interactions before we send humans.
Thank you very much. Wonderful presentation. Thank you so much.
It was back there.
It was?
Yeah, here.
I see it now. I see that.
This looks like a good one. All right, next up, we have Roberto Carlino. Oh. Roberto is an aerospace and robotics engineer at NASA's Ames Research Center in Silicon Valley, California. He worked on the Astro B free flying project and the Advanced Composite Solar Sail System CubeSat project. Carlino has also worked as a software engineer for the Transiting Exoplanet Survey Satellite, which is a follow-on mission of the Kepler Space Telescope, searching for habitable planets around nearby stars. Welcome, Roberto. Come on up. Sorry, this way.
Okay.
There we go.
Thanks so much.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for being here. I know it's Saturday, last day, so really appreciate your presence here. And thanks for the opportunity to speak to you. So today I'm going to talk to you about an experience that I had last year with the Hera astronaut analog mission. But before that, let's give a little bit of context about, everything that we're doing here at the Mars Society Convention, my mission with Hera, and my work for NASA. So why do we explore space? Why all these governments around the world and different space agencies put so much effort in exploring space? So here I give a few kind of fundamental questions driving space exploration. One of the main questions is, how does the universe work? So we know right now so much more about the universe than ever in the past, right? We know a lot about the physics about the universe, the laws that describe the universe, but we're not sure.
I just want to, I'm sorry,
No worries.
there's some little box up there. I'm trying to make that go away, I guess. There we go. Sorry about
Okay,
that.
perfect. Thank you.
Of course.
Thanks so much. Okay. But do we actually know if there is a way to describe the universe with a finite law of physics? So that's one of the main driving questions for space exploration. And then are we alone in the universe? We thanks to astrobiology, we now, and the missions like TESS, which I had the privilege to work on, and Kepler, we know that there are billions of exoplanets only in our galaxy. So at least one planet per star. That means like just trillions and quadrillions of exoplanets. So imagine that, like Earth, maybe there are other planets out there where there are the right conditions for life to evolve and intelligent life to evolve. So, and then another question is, what's life? We actually don't have right now still a very general agreed definition of life. We know a few characteristics of life. We know that life needs to move. Life needs to reproduce, needs to be in equilibrium with its environment, but we don't have a general definition of that. And then another really important question is about where do we come from? We know a lot, we learn a lot about the history of our planet, the history of life in general, but we still don't know the details on how non-living organic molecules became living organic molecules at some point in the history of Earth, sometime 4 billion years ago. So that's one of the main questions driving space exploration. And then finally, one of the most important for me especially for this conference is, where are we going next? Where is humanity going next? Are we actually going to ever colonize other planets, explore the universe, the galaxy, the solar system? So that's another really driving question for space exploration. All right, so let's say that we all here agree, hopefully, that humans will go to other planets, will go to Mars, hopefully colonize Mars. So how do we go? Do we do that? There's a few technical challenges. Nothing is impossible. We've done worse in the past, I think. So there's a few challenges here that drive human deep space exploration. Okay, so one of the main challenges is, of course, getting all the required supplies and fuel to get there. So anything that encompasses fuel, food, medicine, water, and whatsoever. So all the infrastructure needed to get to deep space and stay there, and then hopefully return back. Another really important challenge is, of course, isolation and confinement. Who struggled during COVID? We had really hard times being in isolation and confinement for extended time. In this picture here, we have astronauts from the Apollo program being isolated in a small little volume capsule for a few days. So imagine going to Mars, which right now will take us at least 8 to 9 months with our conventional propellant. Having a bunch of people stuck in these capsules for extended time will have a huge psychological impact on them. And then, of course, radiation, microgravity on the astronaut health. We know that radiation has very serious effects on the astronaut health. Anything from spatial orientation, bone loss, muscle atrophy, and then cosmic and solar radiation, of course, as a increased exposure to cancer, and damage the nervous system. So all these kind of issues related to that are really important to be tackled and solved. And then we have communication and autonomy. As we go farther from Earth, we know that there's some kind of communication delay. We can get up to 44 minutes of round trip delay with Mars. So as we send humans to Mars, we need to have the crew being able to be more and more autonomous on their missions. And then finally, other technical challenges like flight trajectory, the EDL, entry, descent, and landing, and the return. So all this kind of stuff, it's also very important still in work to be figured out. And in particular, the Hera mission that I performed, I did last year, focuses mostly on these two kind of challenges. So isolation and confinement and communication and autonomy. I would say also a little bit on the supplies related to food, but these are the two main ones. Okay, so enough of the pre-context. Let's talk a little bit about analog mission, astronaut analog missions, and the Hera mission in particular. So what are analog missions? they are basically missions that have physical similarities to extreme space environments, and they are used, to just test all kinds of things before we actually perform the real mission in space. So, for example, we can test new technologies, robotics equipment, also countermeasures in psychology and physiology and medicine, all kinds of stuff like that. In particular, Hera does research in behavioral health due to the isolation and confinement, human factors, the control environment capabilities, the communication delay, and also telemedicine operations. Okay, so this was the habitat that I lived in for 45 days. It's a 2.5-story habitat located inside NASA Johnson Space Center in Houston. There's a few different modules. We have a hygiene module on the right. There's a little airlock here on the left, and then 2 main core modules here in the middle. The first floor is used mostly for work and maintenance of the systems and repairs. The second floor is where we have, the galley, the sleep quarters, and also it has a total volume of 150 cubic meters, which is, compared to the ISS, which is 900 cubic meters, is around 6 times less. We were 4 people in there, so for 45 days, it's still kind of like small. For 45 days, you can feel a little bit the confinement. Okay, so mission starts. We started on May 27th last year. We had a really nice and long preparation, 2.5 weeks of training, pre-mission training. This was the crew, 4 of us, different people, different backgrounds, different ages, but we never met before. So it was, those 2.5 weeks of preparation that we really learn and get to know each other, how to live together. Okay, so this was the day of the mission. The ingress. Sorry, that's a bit loud. Okay, so we went in on May 27th, closed the door, and mission starts. So, first few days, kind of time to settle in. We had this really nice cylindrical ladder that connected the 2 floors, which was kind of nice, being like stuck in there in a small space. Was nice to just do some exercise up and down. There was the main way to move from one floor to the other. There was also an elevator lift here to bring big stuff up and down, but we were mostly just using it as a ladder. And then we also had personal space. We had the overhead storage, our bed space, kind of bunk bed. As you can see here, all the bed areas are exposed to each other. So that means that we had no privacy at all, which was part of the mission, part of the project. So, but whenever it was 11 p.m., mission control will turn off the lights, and we would just, get to in our bed and wind down and get to sleep. So this was launch day. We were simulating launch, being on top of the SLS rocket, of course, NASA. So we were there ready for the launch. And we also had brought in a little companion, Martin, we call it affectionately Martin, that was kind of like accompanying us during the entire mission. And then we, had mission starting with the usual, starting at 7 a.m. Mission control would wake us up with a list of songs that we put in together before going in. And kind of like what happens on the ISS with the astronauts. They have their favorite songs that are played at 7 to be used as a wake-up song. We would come downstairs, gear up with all the different sensors and things, and then have breakfast. So coffee, of course, and then breakfast, dehydrated food. There was, for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, kind of like on the ISS, all dehydrated food. you would just add up some boiling water, let it sit for a little bit, and then have it ready to be eaten. And of course, as astronauts do on the ISS in space, there was a daily workout. We would alternate days between strength exercises with dumbbells and weights to the stationary bikes. So kind of like more aerobic exercise, which was honestly for me my favorite part of the day. To kind of like release stress and wind down. That was like really important for me mentally to be sane. A lot of other things that we would do, of course, emergency simulations. So the habitat has all kinds of systems that are very, very similar to the ISS, the recycling system, and all kind of like technical and other systems. So we would perform emergency simulations either individually or as a team, come up together, do the maintenance, the repairs, and whatsoever. Another really cool part of the mission was the virtual reality spacewalks, EVAs. So we had two people being the spacewalkers, the astronauts adventuring outside, and two of the other were the pilot and co-pilot, bringing the vehicle close to Phobos, which was the main purpose of the mission. So getting to Phobos, collecting some samples from the surface, and then bringing them back to Earth. And so we would do a lot of the virtual reality simulations, EVA simulations for that. And then another really strong, big reason to be engaged was to do outreach events, which also were one of my favorites. We would do either a real-time live calls with schools, or we would also record answers to questions from students all over the world. Videos and audios for those students, which was really cool. And then, of course, we had also a lot of really important free time. We had, sorry about that. So we fortunately had access to Netflix. We had a lot of selection of TV shows, movies. We also had a DVD player with a big selection of DVDs. And then we brought in a lot of board games. So we had a lot of, really good time spent together to kind of bond and play and enjoy the time together. And also brought in a lot of books. I think I read more books in 45 days than in my last 10 years. And then, virtual windows to kind of like just meditate and reflect. And also some time spent together. We had some free time to just play some music and pretend to drink cocktails and things like that. A lot of other things that we would do during the mission was, of course, chores. So we would, everything was manual, anything from dishwashing that we didn't have a dishwasher, and then vacuum cleaning, laundry, which was a bit weird because sometimes we would overlap and then we would just have all these clothes hanging around the habitat. But that was part of our day routine. And then other tasks like hydroponic harvesting, really other cool technologies used like the HoloLens. We would do augmented reality tasks with the HoloLens, so the virtual augmented AR HoloLens for telerobotic inspections, and all kind of other things. Also, glove box geologic analysis. So those samples that we retrieved from the surface of Phobos were actually brought inside and then analyzed initially inside the glove box and then brought them back to Earth. And then we were trained with using the Canadarm robotic simulator, and that was one of the most fun parts. It was exactly the same robotic software that is used on the ISS by the astronauts to do the grappling of the cargo of the different vehicles for cargo resupply. Okay, so yeah, after 45 days, here is the last day. It was a very interesting day. We had really strong mixed feelings. we all were really happy to, you know, be done and get out in the outside world, be back with our lovers, with our family, our friends, get some good food finally. But at the same time, we also kind of like were really sad because we created this very convenient little bubble environment all together, where we were able to learn and live really well with each other. And so, yeah, there was a very strong mixed feelings about the last day. Okay, so yeah, after 45 days, we had the splashdown and egress. So we had all kind of family members waiting for us outside, or the other mission people waiting outside. That was really nice. And then finally getting out in the outdoor, in the sun, in the really hot, humid weather of Houston, which was still kind of nice. So yeah, we survived and everybody was extremely happy. So yeah, after the mission, of course, we spent some time, you know, reappreciating and enjoying life again, getting some good food, some good drinks, being out in the nature, went to the ocean, to the beach. That was really nice. Some people went in the water. And so, you know, appreciating all those little things that we all kind of give for granted every day in our day life. All right, so a few conclusions here, just to wrap up. So this mission, 45 days in Hera, gave us a really incredible experience of how you know, astronauts live and work in space, and how you know, space habitats work. We had a really strong learning in teamwork, how to live and work with people from very different personalities and background. And we learned a lot also on how to manage, you know, disagreements in a very democratic way. And then a lot of learning psychologically, of course. I learned a lot by myself, how to be more open to change, to, you know, understand more our own emotions, and finally appreciate a lot more, you know, the little things that we all give for granted every day, about our daily lives. And then last but not least, of course, the incredible contribution that we gave to the NASA scientists in learning a lot about isolation and confinement for extended missions, for future deep space human missions. Okay, so with that, thank you all very much for your attention, and take some questions, I think. I think she was first, yes.
Thank you so much for the presentation. Really interesting. If you were given the opportunity to double the volume of Hera, how would you spend that space? What would you put in it for a similar 45-day mission?
That's a really good question. Thank you for that. Me personally, I would have a little bit more space for like exercise. There was like one of the biggest struggles there. Whenever we had to do, especially like, you know, strength exercise with weights, there was no space at all. So we had to be like cranked there, and then we would like also conflict with each other. And then another really good kind of like things that I would add is kind of like a relaxing kind of living room space. We still, you know, kind of found a way to relax and be comfortable in our chairs and whatsoever. But it was definitely not a nice space for 45 days. You would feel the need for that. And then, I mean, we didn't have really a kitchen. I love cooking, for example. So I would have like, if there was a way even to make like small little cooking things, that would be really nice. We only had a microwave and, you know, boiling water. That's it. So maybe like a small little kind of kitchen area, that would be really nice. Yeah. Thank you. All right, she was next. Yes.
I'm wondering, past analog mission, that when you do kind of a go there, do something, and come back mission, that the return trip is very different than the journey there.
Mm-hmm.
Now, for example, in the 500, the Mars 500.
Yeah.
Right? Did you have a set time, a number of days before you got from Phobos and a set number of days afterwards? Or was that all kind of?
It was kind of like evenly spread. So we would, I think it was like 2 weeks to get to Phobos, then something like 5 days around Phobos, and then other 2 weeks back. So it was kind of like even on that. Mhm.
Things were different than the first on the way there.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think the last 2 weeks were the hardest for sure. Absolutely. They first of all, once you kind of like reach destination, you feel like most of the mission is accomplished, and so your mind is just rewiring and switching to like, okay, I'm done, and so you're not in the same mood, in the same mentality anymore. And then also like as you get closer to the end, we actually kind of like banned. We had a little whiteboard to write the days, to do like something, whatever. So we wrote the days kind of like a countdown, but we waited until the last 2 weeks to do a countdown because we didn't want to have this, reminder every day about like, okay, still 2 weeks, still 3 weeks. So, but yeah, the last 2 weeks were the hardest ones. And also because actually there was also one thing that we did about around the end of the last 2 weeks. It was a sleep deprivation study. So we were awake for 36 hours straight. We couldn't use coffee or anything. So that was like the hardest, probably part of the mission ever. And it was around, the 2 weeks, last 2 weeks timeline. So, that big kind of block, that was like the hardest part. And then after that, the last week was much easier for sure. Yeah. Thank you. Next question. The little kid over there.
You said at the beginning of your presentation that you hadn't met before any of the people you were sharing the 45 days with. How do you think it would have changed the simulation if you had met them before this had started?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So they actually, I think the selection team from Hera, I think they avoid having people that they know each other be part of the same crew for different reasons. So I think you can have, there's many reasons. It could be that, those two people that know each other will bond way much more than anyone else. So it's kind of like unbalanced in a sense. So I think in this kind of missions, it's worth having people, start from the same level for anyone. So I think in this case, it's good. It's better to have people that don't know each other really well from before. But having, the chance to know a little bit more each other before the mission would be actually really beneficial. We got introduced to each other by email like a few weeks earlier to work on the jumpsuits and the patch mission. So that was kind of really nice. We at least, had the chance to get to know each other, virtually or exchange emails, stuff like that. So if we had the chance to know each other even before that, that would have been really nice. But I think, yeah, in general, I think it's better to like have everyone starting from the same level. Really good question. Thank you. I don't know who's next. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, I have to admit to being somewhat torn about watching this. So let me explain why. Not 2 hours down the road from here, there is a facility called Biosphere 2. I don't know if you're familiar with it.
Yeah.
But a number of years ago, like 1993, 8 people were put inside this facility for 2 years, completely self-contained. It was an amazing, it had a lot of results that were questionable, but on the global concept, and it's still operating today under university management. But it was an amazing example of trying to miniaturize Earth systems so that you could put them in a situation like a Mars mission, right? Now, in addition to that, I have watched countless versions of what you've just explained. And so I say to myself, as a scientist, if I was to apply artificial intelligence to all and in the past to all of these simulation missions, and then I would crank into it the inefficiency of NASA as a government organization compared to private industry, I would strike this out so fast that your head would turn around. It would not happen. And yet, why am I torn? Because I have watched wave after wave of new explorers come out and people like yourself. And there is a need to excite you. There's a need to excite you and the other 3 people there. And that need is important, but is it really important enough to take chunks of NASA's budget for a program like this? And I'm not targeting you, I'm targeting almost everything that NASA does with all its redundancy. And God knows I love NASA. I spent 50 years there, but I think I can take a look at this now from a global perspective and really shake my head. And I'm happy that you're happy and that all this was accomplished and that these things go on, because you need to excite people, but at what cost? I don't know if you can even answer this or where to go.
I know how to answer, I think. No, thanks very much for that. I see also the other side that you're kind of explaining here. Honestly, I think one of the main reasons why we should still have NASA be involved in this kind of missions is because, you know, the legitimacy of all the research that is done is very close to what NASA does in human spaceflight in general. So the same group that deals and works with the ISS and the astronauts is the same group that performs HERA, is the Human Research Program. So all those, we were actually talking to the same psychologist that talks to the astronauts on the ISS. So the research that is done by HERA and other analog missions by NASA, they are like very, very tied with the real human spaceflight missions that are done at the JSC and Houston. I don't want to deny that, having other private companies, private groups doing these analog missions is beneficial and brings a lot of good information and the results. But having NASA being involved in this, it's, I think, really good as well. So I think we should have both things, both parts. And NASA provides a lot of really, really strong results and studies. The studies that were done inside HERA and other NASA analog missions are really, directly tied with all the NASA scientists and studies. So I think that provides a lot of good beneficial results.
Hey, Larry, you've had enough.
Go ahead.
Okay, so real quick one. There are other groups of people that, a little bit larger teams, but are in greater deals of isolation for longer periods of time. We've been doing it for decades. They're called submarine crews. So I'm wondering if you have leveraged any of the lessons learned from that world and contact with that world in terms of how they handle isolation and teamwork, or how are you working with that experience from the U.S. Navy?
Sorry, could you repeat the other mission you said?
Excuse me?
You said there was another.
There's another area where people work in isolation, teams, larger teams, but in greater deals of isolation for longer periods of time than you were in, and that's U.S. submarines.
Oh, submarines, sorry. Yeah.
So have you been in contact with the U.S. Navy? Do you have any bodies of work in terms of how they handle isolation, teamwork, psychology of groups, etc.?
Yeah, okay. Thanks for the question. So no, we actually didn't really have any direct contact or connection with them. But I know that the selection of the crew is usually also very open for Navy people. So we have, like, HERA in the past had a lot of military and Navy people joining and be part of the crew, which is like really important. If you have already some experience with the Navy in submarines, especially, then it's really good for a mission like this. So
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you.
You got your mic.
Yes, sure.
Mhm. Can you hold this for me? Set up. Yeah, just give me a second. Clean up some of your windows. This is yours right now, 2023. Yeah, that's it. Close that. It's opening. Oh. There we go. Of course. My pleasure. Oh, wait, that was, I don't think that was the right one. Hold on. Screen two, okay. Good. And now let me make this toolbar go away. All set.
Good morning. It is my pleasure to introduce the Right Reverend James Heiser, who is excuse me, who is a founding member of the Board of Directors and Steering Committee member for the Mars Society and has served as Bishop of the Evangelical Lutheran Diocese of North America since 2006. He was ordained in 1995 and has served congregations in Illinois and Texas. Heiser holds degrees in political science from George Washington University and theology from Concordia Theological Seminary. His published works include 3 books, including A Shining City, On a Higher Hill, Christianity, and the Next New World. Welcome, Dr. Heiser.
Thank you for that introduction. Now for something a little different. There has been an accusation made against the Mars Society, along with other organizations, of being those who are trying to promulgate a dangerous religion. And it's interesting to have this topic arise at precisely the same time that our theme for this conference, in conjunction with the 25th anniversary of the founding of the Mars Society, of a theme of Mars for All. For it well summarizes the vision which has motivated our endeavors over the years. As a society, we declare in our founding declaration, the settling of the Martian New World is an opportunity for noble experiments in which humanity has another chance to shed old baggage and begin the world anew, carrying forward as much of the best of our heritage as possible and leaving the worst behind. As I said to the 1999 convention, to speak of something as being noble is to proclaim that it shows high moral qualities or a greatness of character. Nobility is a matter of the spirit. It is often occasions of spirit denying the needs or desires of the flesh, which we call virtues. And there's more than a quantitative difference between a swarming, dividing hive of bees and the act of colonizing another world. The difference is qualitative as well. In the one situation, there is no choice. Instinct, not choice or conscience, determines action. In the other situation, the decision is made to act in a way deemed to be noble or moral, despite the personal cost. If nothing more than a supposed biological mandate for perpetuation of the species drives our efforts, then one could no more declare it to be noble than to call breathing or eating noble. Such acts are necessary, not noble. Science is important. We are not proposing to go to Mars only for scientific knowledge. Prosperity can be a great blessing. We are not proposing a Martian colony simply for the acquisition of wealth. We're not going as a demonstration of national might. And let us hope that we will not focus now and in the years to come simply on questions of how, questions of technology and finances. That we will also direct ourselves even more to questions of why we should go or not go, why we should colonize or not colonize, why we should terraform or not terraform, and so on. An action is neither good nor noble simply because we are capable of the action. Certainly the 20th century should have taught mankind this lesson. Just as man is both body and spirit, and neglecting the needs of either part damages the whole, so neglecting questions either of how or why will damage what we propose to accomplish. How and why are the questions, the resolution of which are the very reason for being for the Mars Society, and thus have driven our agenda throughout the years. The papers which I've had the opportunity to present since the founding convention have focused on answering, or at least addressing, questions of why, and therefore have been largely focused on matters of theology, philosophy, history, and ethics. Because the mere technological capability to do something is not sufficient moral foundation for doing it. And thoughtfully answering why informs our choice of how. Now, as we meet to discuss Mars for All, there's a growing circle of scholars committed to the position Mars for none. And they're engaged in a polemic in the public square, which has the capacity to disrupt the historical opportunity which lies before us. Often this campaign is focused on questions of how. I believe that we have become quite adept as a society of countering technical questions as they are raised in opposition to the endeavor before us. My concern at present is directed toward those whose opposition arises from the question of why. And part of my concern is centered in the fact that the general public is poorly prepared to engage in this discussion. And those individuals who come from a STEM background, academically speaking, often have their education in the relevant fields limited to 1 or 2 survey courses during their undergraduate education. A specific article provides the impetus for our observations. In April of this year, the website Nautilus published an article with the alarmist title, "The Race to Colonize Mars Perpetuates a Dangerous Religion." The article primarily serves as a softball interview with Mary Jane Rubenstein, who had recently published a book entitled Astrotopia, which is conveniently subtitled "The Dangerous Religion of the Corporate Space Race." Now, Dr. Zubrin offered a response to Rubenstein's argument, and I have no intention of recapitulating his response. It was very well crafted. However, I believe a further critique is necessitated not only by the central thesis of Astrotopia, but the kinship which it shares with the agendas of other writers possessed of a similar mindset. Time constraints necessitate a brief response, and so this presentation should be seen as merely an introduction to the broader topic. Rubenstein's Astrotopia is an expression of her academic background as a professor of religion and science at Wesleyan University. The result is that she brings a more credible academic background than many others who have ventured into this topic previously. That being said, her discipline is religion and not theology, 2 fields which are more distant in their relation than one might seem readily apparent to those outside of the relevant fields of study. Think of religion as a field like linguistics, the study of an abstraction, whereas theology is more like the study of English or French or Russian. Theologians have their respective system of beliefs in detail. Those engaged in religious studies often know very little about any particular system of beliefs, aside from those of their personal adherents, and are instead engaged in discussions of a broader, more vague notion. One may have a PhD in religion without knowing much about Christian theology and its complex interaction with the development of Western philosophy in general, and ethics in particular, and the course of Western civilization as a whole. And this deficit is readily apparent in Astrotopia and similar works. As noted previously, Rubenstein is far from the first person to broach the topic of the interconnection of science, technology, and religion. David Noble's 1997 work, The Religion of Technology, the Divinity of Man, the Spirit of Invention, and also Eric Davis's Technosis, Myth, Magic, and Mysticism in the Age of Information, are 2 of the classic works in this field. And while one may take issue with aspects of their overall arguments, both works provide a wealth of material which the respected authors have marshaled in the endeavor to prove their hypotheses regarding the intersection of particular theological systems and the pursuit of scientific knowledge and the expression of that knowledge in technology. Sadly, Rubinstein does not pursue such care in formulating her arguments. The flaw is that of many a rough draft of a thesis. A multitude of footnotes does not an argument make. Astrotopia is a screed denouncing Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, and Robert Zubrin, with the shop-worn phrases of the professionally indignant. The book is filled with references to the wealth of Musk and Bezos as obscene. The adjective is rarely omitted. In keeping with her obsession with wealth, in the third paragraph of her preface, Rubinstein refers to the well-funded Mars Society led by Robert Zubrin, which led me to wonder whether the entire work was intended as a parody or at least an alternative Earth work of science fiction. Rubinstein defines what she calls the big argument of this book, what we once referred to as a central thesis, as follows. The big argument of this book is that the intensifying new space race is as much a mythological project as it is political, economic, or scientific one. It's mythology, in fact, that holds all these other efforts together, giving them an aura of duty, grandeur, and benevolence. As such, there's not much that's new about new space. Rather, the escalating effort to colonize the cosmos is a renewal of the religious, political, economic, and scientific maelstrom that globalized Earth beginning in the 15th century. In other words, new space isn't just rehashing mythological themes, it's rehashing Christian themes. End of quote. Now, there is an element of truth in this thesis, but Rubinstein and others like her appear to your presenter to have little interest in a helpful evaluation of the interconnections which exist between the axioms which undergird our perception of the world, life, meaning of life, etc., the religious beliefs which all human beings have, which are bound up with such axioms, and the myths which all humans have, which offer explanatory keys for interacting with the world. And over the last 25 years, I've endeavored to explore these themes. Therefore, instead of a coherent argument, in our evaluation, Astrotopia gives more of the appearance of anecdotes and fragments of argumentation cobbled together. The focus of Rubinstein's expansive rage is what she terms imperial Christianity, a term used perhaps scores of times in her book. Now, imperial Christianity is a rather odd term. It's certainly not a technical one. The only way in which one might use it credibly would be to speak of that period of time loosely circumscribed by the Edict of Milan, enacted by Emperor Constantine in AD 313, and the Peace of Westphalia in AD 1648, speaking of that time when there was a sustained formal interaction between the elites of church and state in what was loosely termed Western civilization. But that is not what she intends by the use of this term at all. Instead, it appears to be a catch-all concept for Rubinstein, which means powerful people in leadership positions of Western civilization did things I highly disapprove of and sought to cite the Bible as their authority for doing so. Therefore, Christianity made the imperial takeover of the New World possible. An inability to distinguish between the political philosophies and theological beliefs of groups as diverse as those upheld in Spain during the time of Charles V, the Pilgrims and Puritans of New England, and those which guided William Penn just to barely scratch the surface, results in either incoherence or simply propaganda in argumentation. And this propaganda is brought into service of Rubinstein's professed pantheism. To quote at length, she declares, given its equation of knowledge of nature with power over nature, Western technoscience needs to view the natural world as composed of objects rather than subjects. After all, if the mountaintops were ancestors, then we couldn't remove them. If the stones were persons, we couldn't frack them. If the forests had spirits, we'd hesitate to clear cut them. If the rivers were sacred, we wouldn't fill them with radioactive waste. If rats and mice were kin, we wouldn't test our toxic cosmetics on them. I wonder if she's open to us testing our medicines on them. Just a thought. If the land itself were sacred, we probably wouldn't overarm it within an inch of its life. But thanks to the victory of imperial Christianity, Western communities and institutions don't have these sorts of relationships with the land. Thanks to the victory of imperial Christianity, The land isn't a person we might relate to in the first place. End quote. To which I say, you are welcome. Yet it is true, as Pierre Duhem demonstrated in his 1985 work, the English title of which is Medieval Cosmology, that endeavors of the church to shape the way in which philosophy and natural science were taught, beginning with the University of Paris in the 13th century, made possible both the first and second Renaissances by clearing away the remaining pagan substrata, which was impinging on the actual study of the natural world. What Rubinstein opposes is precisely this understanding of the natural world, which undergirds science since the late Middle Ages. In her words, what is needed requires, quote, learning other ways to live in relation to cosmic land and other ways to do science, end quote, ultimately concluding, quote, maybe ancient pantheistic mysticism is exactly what we need, end quote. Thus, while Rubinstein devotes many pages to the evils of colonialism, her polemic is primarily not an argument anchored in concerns about the treatment of indigenous peoples or the obscenity of slavery. It's an argument for the rights of rocks. In Rubinstein's words, quote, to someone like Zubrin, this sort of thinking is insane. I think that's an accurate representation. Against Zubrin, Alice Gorman shows the moon does do things. In fact, the moon might even desire things. Considering the respiratory trouble it's given our astronauts and functional trouble it's given their machines, the moon might well be expressing a geologic desire that human beings remain on their home planet. End quote. That's right, the moon is out to get us. She continues. And we might apply similar thinking to the efforts to colonize Mars. As Sparrow suggests, if we have to wear spacesuits to visit and completely remodel it in order to stay, then maybe Mars is not our place. Now, after spending a couple of hours out in the promenade yesterday and the 100+ degree temperature, apparently Tempe isn't our place either, but she might argue that as well. She continues, on the other hand, the message is so clear. Obviously, Mars isn't our place. Look at the lengths we'd have to go to just to have a prayer of survival there. It would be so inconvenient to admit that outer space, which is clearly trying to kill us, doesn't want us there. I mean, yeah, or Denver, or the former swamps of Washington, D.C., or the Cascades. I mean, pick your place where you have to wear clothing or have things like heating or air conditioning to live there pleasantly. All of these are also apparently not our place. Thus for Rubinstein, and I quote, as thrilling as I still believe them to be, the Apollo missions replay the Christian imperialism that founded and expanded the US. In fact, I'm going to argue that these missions function religiously, even beyond their being named after a god, and even beyond their being called missions, end quote. Although her book seems to lack the coherence for its author to express the central issue at stake in this discussion, the argument is intended to promote destruction of an understanding of the natural world and humanity's relationship to it, which is common to the sciences and a traditional Christian understanding of man's stewardship of nature. She's battling for a pantheistic mythology in her own claim to supplant in part the notion that, quote, humans are superior to animals, animals are superior to vegetables, and rocks are just rocks, end quote. Astounding. Rubinstein is far from alone in this ethical, philosophical, theological attack on space exploration and settlement. The 28 essays contained in Reclaiming Space, Progressive and Multicultural Visions of Space Exploration, are held together by a rejection of Western philosophy, science, and history, which have given rise to and shape to the beginning of humanity's exploration of space. In the words of one of its editors, the Mars Society and other, quote, advocacy groups discussed here are promoting a dangerous ideology as a foundation for national space policy. Why is it dangerous? Because it's elitist, exclusive, and very, very Western. Advocates for space colonization and other forms of exploiting extraterrestrial resources are overwhelmingly Western, white, and male. end quote. One of the more vehement opponents of human exploration and settlement of space is Dr. Linda Billings, whose expertise is not in STEM or philosophy or theology or ethics, but in communications, and yet is one of the editors of Reclaiming Space, who seems to fluctuate between denouncing space exploration and demanding that we wait at least a century for humanity to, in her words, socially evolve. In a recent article for Scientific American entitled, "Why We'll Never Live in Space," thank you, Scientific American, Billings is quoted as declaring, "I don't see that NASA is producing any evidence that the human settlement of space will be for the benefit of humanity," end quote. But her own writings are more extreme. She entitled her article for the journal Theology and Science in 2017, "Should Human Beings Colonize Other Planets?" No, well, at least that's unequivocal. "Colonizing Other Planets is a Bad Idea" was the title of another article for Futures in 2019. On other occasions, Billings plays the "we're not ready" card, claiming, for instance, quote, "If and when human beings are further evolved, culturally, intellectually, spiritually, in all these important aspects of being human, then we could proceed. But we're nowhere close right now," end quote. Now, given the fact that an extreme advocate of the Mars for none argument is one of the editors of the Reclaiming Space volume, your presenters left with the impression that some, if not many, of those raising theological, philosophical, and ethical objections to Western thought shaping the philosophy for exploration and settlement are doing so because they recognize that delaying that process is derailing that process. This is but a brief sampling of what is being published against exploration and settlement right now, and being published precisely for those who are students of the social sciences. And a thorough response to these lines of argumentation is necessary because the books pushing for Mars for none aren't coming out from some obscure publishing houses. They're being published, for example, Astrotopia is published by the University of Chicago. The Reclaiming Space volume is a product of Oxford. Another volume on ethics, which takes a similar theme, was published by the MIT Press. Just name a few. For anyone interested in such topics, these books will become the college textbooks alienating Generation Z from support for exploration and settlement, as the arguments which they present are inextricably bound up with the mindset which dominates significant portions of those fields broadly called the humanities. Arguments for how to explore and settle Mars will not be relevant if we lose the discussion regarding why we should do so. Nothing is served by attempts to placate individuals such as those whom I have briefly discussed, because I believe beneath the surface of their objections and their calls for delay is precisely a commitment to the position Mars for none. Every concession is a step away from exploration and settlement. It is because theirs is, I believe, ultimately a position of intentional economic stagnation, a denigration of a Western commitment to a tradition of political philosophy, ethics, and often theology. In short, a rejection of the civilization which has thus far blazed the way forward. They do not envision a bold future for humanity. I would posit that if there is a religion in this entire exchange which is dangerous for humanity at the beginning of the space age, it is precisely Rubenstein's LARPing at being an ancient pantheist, or Billings' adherence to Unitarian Universalism, which went out of intellectual fashion about the same time as fainting couches. One of the authors of Reclaiming Space declared that space exploration and settlement, and I quote, shares a key quality with lethal malignant cancer. And further declared, I propose the metaphor of civilizational cancer to describe the expansionist behavior that results in self-destruction due to the colonial impulse itself. In short, that author maintains that the reason why the Drake equation is failing so far is that any civilization that is foolish enough to leave its own planet dies the death it deserves, because expansionism, colonialism are an intellectual cancer. And so if we want to avoid dying of that cancer, we should stay in our mud huts and eat bugs, is apparently the pantheistic interpretation of this. No, the desire to expand into new environments is natural as a characteristic of all living things. The task ahead of us is to defend the understanding that it can be noble, virtuous, for us to do so. And in this is also then the exploration of our identity. As Boethius notes in his work, The Consolation of Philosophy in the 6th century, indeed, man is so constituted that he then only excels other things when he knows himself. But he is brought lower than the beasts if he loses this self-knowledge. For that other creatures should be ignorant of themselves is natural. In man, it shows as a defect. Knowledge of one's own nature and the pursuit of virtue are to animate every worthy human endeavor. And so therefore, why and how are constrained by virtue. Virtue is manifest in how we confront the challenges set before us. Herodotus thus concluded his histories with the choice between a life of ease and a life challenged by hard land. I touched on this a number of years ago in the paper on Epicureanism versus Stoicism. And in Herodotus' history, when the Persians suggested to the Greeks that it was best to settle for a life of ease in a land of abundance, Herodotus writes, Cyrus did not think much of this suggestion. Soft countries, he said, breed soft men. It's not the property of anyone's soil to produce fine fruits and good soldiers too. The Persians had to admit that this was true and that Cyrus was wiser than they. So they left him and chose rather to live in a rugged land and rule than to cultivate rich plains and be subject to others, end quote. Mars, we know, is not the easy choice. It is precisely the hard choice. In ethics, as in the history of nations, it is rarely the easy choice that is the right one, as President Kennedy reminded us in September of 1962. I welcome any questions.
Thank you for the epic takedown. That was fantastic. So just two brief observations in sympathy with what you're saying, and then a question.
Please.
First, I would say that, you know, the intent of their arguments, if they were successful,
yes,
it will all but ensure the worst outcomes that they are complaining about, because they can't stop the most, you know, commercially minded from doing these things.
Yes.
And so they all but ensure their own kind of worst dystopian nightmares if they were successful.
Yeah.
And the other thing, just more a personal view on some of these folks, is a lot of times this seems to be, for some of these individuals, the glorification of themselves masquerading as a refutation of human growth. So, I mean, they talk about it in these negative terms because that's all they have. But a question for you, given the emergence of this thinking in some of these more prominent institutions and publications,
yes,
what do you suggest as a research and communications agenda to counter it?
Well, I believe that we need to continue to offer a robust response to these arguments arising broadly out of the humanities. And in short, as a society, as a Mars society, we need to engage more individuals who are committed to our common cause, who come from those backgrounds. It's easy for these conferences to be, I think, unfairly viewed as simply, you know, kind of tech nerdy gathering to talk about the latest advances in the sciences. We know that that's not all that it is, but I think we need to publish more and more of a robust response to this. I think that Dr. Zubrin has done an excellent job with this in his books over the years, and his next book proves to be more of that counter argument, but there need to be more voices. And I think we need to be more actively countering these kinds of works. The first step in countering a difficulty like this is to identify its existence, and then to carefully deconstruct the argument and reply to it. And I think we need to bring in those from the academic disciplines who have that capacity to respond to it. One of the things I noticed as I was undertaking this endeavor was, with the exception of Rubenstein, almost all of the people engaged in discussions of the ethics of space settlements come from irrelevant disciplines. They're coming out of astrophysics, for example, or astronomy. I'm thinking of two individuals in particular right now who've written or compiled entire works on this topic. Now, I am certain that they are of the top quality within their respective fields, but their field is not ethics. Their field is not philosophy. And them writing books on those topics is as absurd as if I were to just decide I was going to write a book on astrophysics. I mean, no one wants to read that, and you shouldn't want to read that. So we need people who actually have the necessary academic background. And I think sometimes there is a propensity in those of STEM background to think, well, what's the big deal? It's just history. Anybody can do that. It's just, it's ethics. Well, I've got a firm sense of what I think is right and wrong. Yes, but why do you have that? And learning all of the various systems that can help to build those worldviews is a lifetime endeavor. Please, you can get the microphone. Oh, I'm sorry. Robert, did you have something you wanted to ask first?
Yeah. Sure. So I definitely agree with you that part of the problem is that they are propagating a view of knowledge that is improper. But I think part of their motivation also, especially sort of with the pantheist things, is that they feel that this is sort of a part of their feminist thinking. And I think it's important for you, particularly as a Christian minister, to point out that in fact, modern sexual ethics, the belief that women should not be exploited, is a profoundly Christian thing. I mean, if you talk to a Roman citizen, he would have thought that, using women in any way he thought proper was perfectly okay. And so I think, well, respond to that.
Well, I would just build on another element of it, as you and I discussed briefly the other day. When you look, for example, at the elimination of slavery, one of the most important factors that is almost entirely forgotten about is the Methodist Church, which in particular stood out as a champion where there was no kind of confusion of reason. You can, Southerners will have a propensity to want to view the War of Northern Aggression as about Northern industrialization versus Southern slavery. I think that that's a slightly absurd argument, but the point is they can point to mixed motivations for the North. For the churches which actively committed themselves to that social change, it was a matter of theological conviction being lived out in social policy. So, to that point.
So,
Robert.
Yeah, a couple things. First of all, just he mentioned my article. You should Google it because it's a hoot. Okay, just Google Zubrin Astrotopia Quillette, which was the publication that published my article. And I also have a book that I wrote about 10 years ago called Merchants of Despair, the Fatal Cult of Anti-Humanism. And see, that is what this fundamentally is. That is, if you say that human beings are a destructive force in the universe, then their numbers, activities, and liberties must be severely constrained.
Yes.
And therefore, someone must be empowered to do the constraining. And that is why intellectuals that promulgate this thesis in one form or another will never lack for sponsors. Okay, that's the key here. So, for instance, it may. Okay, look, you start with, well, how can you say human beings have superior rights to animals? Look in the eyes of your dog. You certainly wouldn't want to be cruel to dogs. Okay, fine. I actually kind of agree with that. And they say, but what about trees? Okay, what about rocks? Okay, and if you say you want to constrain human activities to protect the rights of rocks, you are basically not trying to protect the rights of rocks. You are trying to constrain human activities.
Yes.
Okay, and how can you defend human rights in any form if human beings do not have superior dignity to rocks? Okay, so this is not a defense of rocks or of nature or anything of this sort. This is simply an attack on liberty. Okay, is what it is.
Yeah.
And that's why it is relevant. And that's why, by the way, we've had these debates. Do humans have the right to terraform Mars? Well, this is significant, despite the fact that we're not going to make that decision. Okay, despite the fact that we currently don't have the ability to terraform Mars, and it is debatable whether we'll ever have, although I believe we do, or will. But the issue of whether humans have the right to terraform Mars is an issue of the dignity of humans. That is what is fundamentally being argued. Okay. And that is why this stuff needs to be countered. Okay. The issue is not the fate of Martian rocks. The issue is the fate of humanity.
Precisely. Thank you, Robert.
Hey, don't we need a female voice here? I understand the problem of imperial Christianity. If you look at women in Christianity, you can understand. And we're in an environmental crisis because of this particular kind of colonialization. Yes, it's too hot in Arizona, and we're moving into a hot house Earth. So to deconstruct colonialism is important so that we can colonize outer space in a different way. And I suggest we need to listen to women more to find the wisdom of how actually to colonize it with intelligence for everybody, Mars for all.
No one's voices are being excluded. No one's arguing for anyone's voices to be excluded. I don't see any further need for response.
Hi, guys. So I'm Shannon Rupert. I was the next speaker. We are running so far behind. And I know what it's like to look out at an angry, hungry crowd and know that I'm not talking fast enough. And I want to give, this is the first pure scientific talk that I've given in a very long time. I wanted to give it enough time for me to feel comfortable in it. And I don't feel comfortable with all those angry faces out there. I don't think it's fair to the afternoon people if I take up time that isn't mine. So I'm going to stay tuned. I'll be back next year. And I'll give the talk then. I really appreciate it, you guys, but I just don't think it's fair. There are way more people in the afternoon than just me, and I don't want to set us all the way back. I appreciate it. I was excited. I really wanted to do this. But I do science faster than NASA, but not that fast. So let's all just go eat lunch, enjoy the, what?
If you would be willing to move to the 5 o'clock hour, this track here is. We actually.
Oh.
We have.
If you're really, really dying to know, I'll let you know, Penny Boston and I are back on the track of Desert Varnish. And those of you who were here Thursday, there was a lot of really looking inward about what is life detection, what are biosignatures, where is the limit of life? And we're, of course, because it's Penny and me, exploding that, looking outward, applying new, a lot of ecological theory and unfortunately a lot of math to look if we can't answer the question, is desert varnish geologically or biologically mediated? The hint, the really big hint, biology all the way. And I'll have more next year. Oh, and enjoy lunch.
So a couple quick announcements before we depart. We have an updated schedule for the Student Mars debates organized by Rachel Zubrin. The final high school round happened last evening and will be replayed in the Gold Room at 4 p.m. today, followed by the final round for the middle schoolers, which will be live. These debates have been fantastic, and we invite you to watch them starting at 4 p.m. in the Gold Room. We will have additional student presentations here in the Arizona Ballroom during the 5 p.m. hour. That hour is currently shaded gray in the schedule, but we will fill that time with as many student presentations as we can. And we will likely have other opportunities throughout the day. Students can coordinate with Nicole and I on their exact time and location today. That's all, and I hope you guys have a good lunch, and we'll be back here at 1 o'clock for my talk. Thank you. Yeah, come on up.
And one last, all of our Mars ambassadors, if you're part of the Mars Ambassador Program, come on up. We want to get a quick group photo. And if you'd like to become a Mars Ambassador, come on up too, and we'll get you involved. All right, real quick photo.